Hello and welcome to the Blues Kind Show, the show for kind blues. Today, I'm looking at Carlton's chance of bouncing back after a disappointing 2025. Carlton made two finals appearances in a row in 2023 and 2024 respectively, so I wanted to look at what sort of stead that would hold us in comparing to other teams that have been in similar positions. There's a few layers that I wanted to go through, and I hope they make sense because there's quite a bit to get into today. And I hope ultimately it gives a bit of comfort that maybe things are not as bad as they seem. So before I get too far into it, I wanted to say that the reason why I'm looking at teams that have made at least two finals appearances in a row is to sort of discount the flash in the pans. I had a theory going into making this video that if you've made two finals in a row, that probably suggests something about your list, which is quite positive, as opposed to teams that we've seen sort of bob in, then bob out, not really doing too much after the fact. So without further ado, the first thing that I've done is have a look at the teams' records from 2015 to 2025. If you count quite quickly, you can probably see there's only 13 teams there. And the reason for that is that only 13 teams since 2015 have made two final series in back-to-back years. So that eliminated 5 teams, and they're the Essendons of the world, St Kilda, the Suns, Freo, and one other that's escaping me for now. Doesn't matter. Look, North Melbourne. So I thought we can get straight into it and say those 5 teams are pretty irrelevant to what we're looking at. They've all been in sort of a state of perpetual rebuild, much in a way that Carlton was prior to 2023. But what I want to see is what sort of stead will our recent form suggest that we should sort of be held in. And what I did from that point is break it down into a couple of tiers. Those tiers are sustain, borderline sustain, miss and bounce back, end of an era, and miss and stay missed. Before I get too deep into this, what I want to say is I'm not trying to rank how successful these teams are, especially not overall, because it's only based on their ladder position at the end of the home and away season. Therefore, I'm not trying to draw any sort of larger corollary. It's more to see how these teams responded after having a period of success. So just to quickly go through the teams, not all of them, because again, there's actually 12 there. I've left Carlton off altogether. Cats, GWS, and Brisbane have all been respectively very successful. Cats have missed 2 final series out of the last 11. GWS have missed 3 of the last 11. Brisbane have made the last 7 years of finals straight. So straight into sustain. Pies have made 6 of the last 11 final series, including 6 of the last 8. Sydney have made 8 of the last 11, but they missed a run of 2 in the middle. So that's why they're only border sustained for me. They had a quick mini regeneration in there. The teams that miss and bounce back, the Bulldogs and Port, tend to make finals in bunches, 2 to 3 years at a time, then will miss for a year, come back strong again. End of an era. And this is the most important segment that I want to touch on, is why I've put Hawthorn here. This is mainly a comment on the first segment. So if I go back, as we can see, Hawthorn, obviously, we're coming off a three-peat through the end of 15. They then made finals again in 16 and 18 with 1 year gap in the middle. They've obviously made the last 2 years finals, so I can't comment on the current era. They might end up being a team that goes into sustain or border sustain if they were to make finals again next year. But the reason they're in end of an era for this exercise is just because of the end of the three-peat era. A team like Melbourne, they made 4 out of 6 final series and then they fell apart. Richmond had a great run from 2015 to 2022. The era's obviously over and they've committed to a hard rebuild. Eagles, I think they made something like 6 final series in a row and then just stopped making it all together. And then Adelaide is the one team, if we're to go back and you look at the top here, they made finals in 15, 16 and 17 and not again for another 7 years. So that's why I've categorised these teams the way that I have. Only one team that should have still been decent missed and stay missed. And that was Adelaide, and there's some large factors that we'll discuss in a moment. Based on my, tiering here, you're as likely to be in the end of an era tier as you are to be in collectively both of the borderline sustain or miss and bounce back era. This is relevant because although Carlton didn't really have an era, you could say that we missed our era, hypothetically. Therefore, I think it's fair to say there's as good of a chance that we either are in the miss and bounce back tier, if we were to do this in a year's time, or the borderline sustain tier, as we would be the end of an era tier. Maybe we've just missed our window. However, it is much more likely to make finals again if you've made it for 2 years in a row than it is for the end of an era or the miss and stay missed. That's because in the 3 top tiers, there are 7 teams, and in the bottom 2, there are 5. I don't think Carlton has missed its era or its run or its window, however you want to say it. The 4 teams in there I've described as having an era because they either won grand finals, repeatedly made prelims around it, were very successful teams. Carlton obviously has not had that sort of an era, but if we replace the word era with window, I don't think that our window is shut, and I'll get into why later. However, because this is such a small sample size, I'm only looking at, 12 teams in my tiering. What I thought would be more valuable is to look at a couple of the case studies from the tiering. I'm going to ignore teams that are in the sustain and borderline sustain categories because I think we can all agree Carlton is nowhere near that for the time being. Maybe in 2 to 3 years we will be, but right now, that ain't us. We're hoping to get into the miss and bounce back tier and avoid the bottom 2. That's what we're hoping for. Therefore, I think the most relevant examples are the Adelaide Crows from 2015 to 2017, Richmond from 2013 to 2015, and Port in 2020 to 2021. So, before we get into those examples, I just wanted to have a quick look over Carlton's 2025 profile. This year, we were the 5th eldest team based on the age of those who actually played games. Of our list of 45 players, 39 total players were used this year. And when you think about the fact that Nick Newman and Jagger Smith missed the whole season, there was 43 players available and 39 of them played. At the end of 2024, we changed 9 players that were largely in 2 camps. The first camp is those who just didn't play at all, and that was Alex Murkov and Dom McQuay. And then there was depth players, such as Jack Carroll, David Cunningham, Matt Kennedy, Caleb Marchbank, Jack Martin, Matt Owies, and Sam Durden. That's 7 players who ranged from a minimum of, I believe Sam Durden played 2 games in 2024 in his final season, up to guys that played over 20 games. So, for example, Matt Kennedy played every game of 2024. And while this was done partly due to our injury profile and wanting to reshape the list, it cut a lot into depth. I think that the decision was correct. Guys like Jack Carroll, Cunningham, Marchbank, Martin were regularly injured, so they couldn't really be relied upon. But guys like Kennedy and Owies, who played a lot of football for us, that severely cut into our depth, especially when you consider the fact, say you have an injury and you're down to the 30th guy on your list, maybe Cunningham is the 31st, and he was an AFL-ready player. The problem was you just couldn't rely on a guy like him, unfortunately, due to his injury history. Additionally, at the end of 2024, we changed none of the coaching panel. Going into 2025, we're already aware of some of the changes that have either occurred or will be on the way. For example, we'll have a new football boss, given that Brad Lloyd has been sacked. There will be at least 4 changes to our assistant and development coaching ranks, with Aaron Hamill, Aaron Greaves, Tom Lonergan and Luke Power departing the club for a variety of reasons. We've also lost Jack Silvani and Tom de Koning so far. I had a discussion recently about some delisted players in Orazio Fantasia, Alex Cincotta and Harry Lemmy. And in addition to that, I would say that the rumours are quite reliable that Charlie Curnow is probably on the way out. That's how I feel about it. Different people in the media are oscillating between saying he's definitely gone and he's definitely staying. So we'll leave that to the side. The point is, there's been some change. We've also, and this is not a change, although it is from our cultural past, we've decided to keep the coach for an extra year. And by that I mean let him honour the last year of his deal. So while we're not entirely sure of exactly what we're going to look like next year, these are the sorts of changes we've already had thrust upon us for, again, a variety of reasons. So I wanted to get into my first example, which is the 2015 to 2017 Crows. The reason why I want to touch on the Crows first is because they're the only team that missed and stayed missed, and I think there's very specific reasons to them that caused them to be in that basket. They made the finals in each of those 3 years. It culminated in 2017 with them winning the minor premiership and making the grand final, and then comprehensively losing to Richmond. In 2017, they were the 5th oldest team based on the age of those who actually played, which is the same as us this year. However, they only played 31 players from their list when compared to the 39 that we played, showing how injury-free they were. If you consider that at the time, I can't remember if there was a sub or not at that point, but let's just say of the starting 22, and we'll leave the sub to the side, they only needed to go into depth 9 players, whereas we needed to go into depth 15 players. And that makes quite a difference when you're reaching that far down on your list. However, the spectacular way in which they lost to Richmond ultimately led to an infamous end-of-season camp. I refer to it as the racism camp due to the reported incidents of racism. There were also reported incidents of psychological duress that, on my reading, could potentially be described as torture. However, for libelous reasons, or at least avoiding libel, I would rather call them, forms of psychological duress that they placed the players under. It's widely reported that it incredibly disrupted the group and the hierarchy at the Crows in totality. Before I touch a little bit more on the camp, there were also some notable changes at the end of the year. Charlie Cameron and Jake Lever were both traded. The Adelaide Crows wanted to retain both of those players, but they both decided to leave for Brisbane and Melbourne, respectively, with a lot of good footy ahead of them. I believe they were only 23 each when they moved. At the end of the season, they didn't lose a lot of other guys of note. Cam Ellis-Yeoman left via delisting, and he was a a regular in the team, in terms of depth. And Scott Thompson, who was a warrior for them, retired at the season's end. They came 12th the next season, and in 2019 they came 11th before bottoming out completely and coming last in 2020. Don Pike was sacked at the end of 2019. So he survived for 2 more seasons before it all sort of unravelled. The then chairman, Rob Chapman, in an interview with ABC at the end of 2019, said the following: "I can't deny that camp has not had an impact on our football club. At the very least, it has been a huge distraction and sucked oxygen out of the football club." That's at the very least. Given the amount of players that would proceed to leave, including the 2 that I mentioned earlier, as well as guys like Mitch McGovern, who, while he hasn't necessarily lived up to it for Carlton, he was on an excellent trajectory at the Crows, and also a fan favourite and club favourite in any bets moved on. I think it would be fair to say that it was at the least that it was a huge distraction. So it took 2 years for the fallout to come to full fruition. However, while I think it was worth looking at the Crows, again, they are the one team from this example that made finals multiple years in a row, but then did not again for a long period. And I think it is fair to say it's because there was a large intervening event that I pray that Carlton does not repeat. And I don't expect them to, because it's really one out of the box. I can't think of another example which is anything like what happened in Adelaide. But all power to them. Great example of what not to do. Next, we move on to Richmond. From 2013 to 2015 is the period that I'm the most interested in. Now, before I get onto the Tigers, I just want to make a very small disclaimer. I am not saying we're going to have their success. I am not saying we're about to win 3 out of 4 flags and be the defining team of a decade. I am just saying that they bounced back from an underwhelming period in 2013 to 2015, and that there might be some things in common that hopefully Carlton can learn from that would lead to us similarly bouncing back. Bounces high? Probably not. But just bounce back into the finals is all I'm shooting for. So, in all 3 years, 2013 to 15, they made the finals but never got past the first round. They also never made the top 4. They came 5th, 8th and 5th. In 2015, the last year of the period that I want to look at, they were middle of the pack for age, experience and number of players used. However, in 2016, the year that they fell off and came, I believe it was 13th, they used a league highest 41 players. Again, lists in the AFL go up to 45. This led to an incredibly unsettled lineup throughout the year. Again, we used 39 this year, including 2 guys that never got on the park due to long-term injuries. So we had 4 guys left in the sheds. They had 4 guys left in the sheds. They also had 3 coaching changes. And I want to be clear, this is not some numerology, oh, we had 3, they had 3. I'm just literally saying the numbers happen to be the same. Out, Ross Smith, Greg Mellor, and Mark Williams. It might be Maylor. I've got to be honest, I'm not overly familiar with Greg's work. But in are some familiar names that everyone touts as being a big part of the success that was to unfold for Richmond. Justin Lepich returned to coach at Richmond after his time at the Lions. Craig McRae came in as their VFL coach, and Blake Caracella came in, I believe, as their forwards coach. They also had a strong emphasis in change regarding their training and preparation. We're about to see another familiar name. Luke Meehan was promoted to their head of, I think it was strength and conditioning, and Rob Innes, who is now our head of strength and conditioning, was given the portfolio for rehab, taking over from Luke Meehan, the gentleman who was promoted. Pardon me. Additionally, there was an increased emphasis on buy-in and encouraging bonds within the team. Given the unrest that has befallen Carlton, with all the discussion of players apparently, dissatisfied with the game plan or how the club's managed or things that are a bit extracurricular to what a player should be concerned with, and the emphasis that Graham Wright and Michael Voss, Paddy Cripps, Wieders have all come out in their recent media with, saying that we need to be Carlton first, I would think that at least everyone getting on the same page will be a feature for us, much in the same way as it was for Richmond at the time. I was also reading into it that Richmond did a number of quite interesting bonding activities. One thing they did was the club gave, they divide the list into 22 guys on each side, and they'd give one of the groups of 22 $5 each, and they'd have to take out someone from the opposing group for a coffee that they ordinarily didn't hang out with, just as an idea to sort of increase bonding and whatnot. And I think activities like that sound really good. They famously brought in some mindset experts. I want to guess who it was. I think it was the Resilience Project, but I'm not entirely certain of that. I think whether we do the bonding activities and that sort of stuff aside, I think there's going to be that increased renewed focus on putting Carlton at the top of everything that the players who want to remain and therefore will remain do. In addition to that, there was some list changes that I think you could say are quite in common with what we are about to experience. They lost Troy Chaplin, Brett Deledio, and Ty Vickery. Now, I'm not going to say Ty Vickery's a superstar, he's not. But he was a good player who played a hell of a lot of football for Richmond. Brett Deledio was also a multiple-time best and fairest for Richmond. He was their best player for a long period of time. And Troy Chaplin, after coming over from Port, was a really important part of their backline. I think you could liken that to Jack Silvani, Tom de Koning, and potentially Charlie Curnow leaving. I don't know if any of the players are the calibre of, say, Charlie, but Brett Deledio was an excellent player. If I had to rank all 6 players that I've just named, I'd have him second before Tom. Troy Chaplin was an excellent player. I'd have him ahead of Jack Silvani. So it's not to say that they've had the calibre of players, but in terms of important players that fill big roles at the club, I think there is a likeness there. Additionally, they traded in Josh Caddy, Toby Nankervis, and Dion Prestia. They drafted Shai Bolton and Jack Graham, and guys like Nathan Broad and Dan Butler, who were already on the list, sort of came into their own a little bit. We don't have a lot of rumours on who Carlton is trying to recruit at this point in time, especially at the top end. We've heard some stuff about, Liam Reedy, who's a backup ruckman, or Campbell Chesser, who's a young bloke who's had some injuries over at West Coast. It'll be interesting to see what we do. But the biggest part of it for mine is a guy like Jack Graham went on to be an integral part almost immediately. Shai Bolton took a couple more years to sort of come into his own, and guys like Nathan Broad, Jason Castagna, and Dan Butler, who'd been on the list but for different reasons hadn't come on just yet, really started to hit their straps. And so a lot of the improvement was internal. Getting Caddy, Nank, and Prestia was obviously incredibly important, but it's not like that the list didn't, get that sort of internal growth that you'd like. So there's a bit in common. The dumping of assistant coaches, letting go of or losing multiple senior players, refocus the team on winning, and revamp their training and prep with a focus on injury prevention, something Carlton has openly stated that it's trying to achieve after having a really high number of players used. Just before I finish the segment on Richmond, again, this is not me saying I think we will have their success. do I think this is an indication to say that the sorts of changes that we have in common with them from that period could lead to a bounce back? Yes. Will it lead to a bounce back as hard? I hope so, but I would probably doubt it. The last team I want to have a look at was Port Adelaide from the 2020 to 2021 period. Port Adelaide, and I'll just bring up their larger trend here. So Port Adelaide came 10th in 2018 and 2019. Port is probably the example that I think is most similar to our own in terms of what they did to their list. And that's probably the most notable thing where I think Carlton can kind of improve, because I think a lot of it is more attitudinal than anything else. And I think there's times where reshaping the list to have younger guys in the place of older guys, one, it can lead to an improvement because they might have more potential, but two, it's much easier to have a cohesive unit, because instead of having 15 guys that have been in the league for 10 years and think they know everything, you might have 8. And then the other 7 are made up of young kids who are just happy to be there and will lap up everything you say. So, in 2018, they bought in Ryan Burton, Scott Lysette, Connor Rozee, Zach Butters, and Xavier Dersma. Pretty good haul. They did this in part because Rozee, Butters and Dersma were drafted by trading out Chad Wingard to Hawthorn and letting Pollock go in free agency. That bears a little bit of a similarity to what we are doing with, again, Jack, Tom and Charlie. In 2019, they brought in Miles Bergman and Mitch Georgiadis and offloaded a bunch of depth players. They let go of a few more in 2018, just by the way, but I didn't really want to go through all the names, frankly. Again, like the examples before, they kept their coach for the year after, Ken Hinkley. However, they made a number of changes to their assistant coaches from the year 2018, when they first missed the finals, to the panel they had in 2020, when they made it again and actually came first. The changes were Chad Corns, Matthew Nix and Aaron Greaves went. They were then subsequently replaced by Jared Schofield, Brett Montgomery, and one other. Actually, no, I think that was it. I think they went with a more streamlined coaching panel at that time. Between 2019 and 2020, they went from the 7th most experienced to the 4th most experienced. Carlton was the 5th this year. I would imagine it'll stay about the same, given the guys that we're losing are in their, sort of mid to late 20s. They also went from playing 37 players in 2019 down to 30 in 2020. It's worth mentioning 2020 was the shortened season due to COVID. However, 37 players is 2 less than what we played this year, so quite a few. 30 is ridiculous. It means, again, ignoring the sub, they only had to dip 8 into their depth. That's incredible. Things that we have in common with Port is stability at head coach, changes in assistants, injury reduction. The part that interests me the most, though, is the trading out or letting go of via free agency senior players and seeing development in their 2nd and 3rd year players. Again, Rozee, Dersma and Butters were drafted in 2018. I'm saying by 2020, they were sort of quite ready to go because they were going into their 2nd year. Like, they were able to contribute a bit. For us, guys that'll be in their 2nd and 3rd years next season are Jagger Smith. We haven't seen him yet. Harry O'Farrell showed a lot of nice signs. The Campo brothers, Ashton Moyer, Billy Wilson played a bit at the end of the year, Matt Carroll and Cooper Lord. Additionally, there'll be some fourth-year players, guys like Ollie Hollands and Lockie Cowan, that I think are showing quite a bit going forward. There was also continued improvement from their middle class of players, if you like. We actually have one that was on their list at the time, a guy like Frankie Evans, who's shown some continued improvement over that period. Guys like Motlop, who, not a perfect player, but are showing some amounts of improvement. A guy like Hudson O'Keefe, who played some really nice football at the end of the year. Not perfect, but the sort of guys that will reinforce your depth. Ditching several senior blokes to get a bit younger is not just good from a list perspective, but given how Chad Wingard and Jared Pollock went at their respective next clubs, I think you could draw a reasonable inference that it might have helped to improve their culture. My recollection is that Chad Wingard was described as quite a difficult player, and Jared Pollock did so well at North that he had a 5-year deal and he got paid out at the end of the 4th. I don't want to besmirch either of these guys. These are just either things that were... Actually, no, they were just things that were reported at the time. In Jared's case, it's just a fact. So I say that to say, rebuilding and retooling, getting the list profile a little bit younger with high-end talent, and the continued development of players within the list, I think, is something that could be the basis of us being able to rebound reasonably quickly. In summary, what I hope this shows is that having a core group of experienced players while making movements around them can lead to repeated success. Like I mentioned, keeping together our senior players, but seeing the growth of the 2nd to 4-year guys around them, I think that's how you best complement what you have available to you. I am someone who thinks that we've overinvested in tall guys. Well, if we lose Charlie and we have lost Tom de Koning, suddenly we can reinvest into other areas and find guys to replace them that are substantially cheaper and will give you enough at those roles while you improve the other spots on the list that might, make you a little bit more vulnerable. Making 2 finals in a row is an actual achievement on its own in the AFL. There's 5 clubs that have not done it since 2015. I think that while it's nothing to write home about, the club should look at what they've achieved and say, no, we actually have something here. And these are some stories, some examples of where it can be used as a basis to springboard you into something a bit better. Richmond obviously had a dynasty. Port were a top 4 team 4 out of the next 5 years. Cleaning out the veterans is nothing to be scared of. Richmond and Port both did it. Clarity of identity and buy-in is more important, and with everything Carlton is saying, it seems that's the direction we're going and what we are prioritising. If you like what I'm doing, please give me a like or subscribe. If you want to engage, push back, agree, give me some ideas, please feel free to leave a comment. And as always, go Blues!